What's going on, everybody? My name's LeakyTapsMan, and this is another in my mini-series of games that need or deserve sequels. And for this video, I'm going to go for shooters, so first-person shooters and third-person shooters. Now, when I say sequel, I don't necessarily mean a direct sequel. It could just be another game in the series, so it could use the franchise's resources, universe, all that kind of stuff. But I digress, let's get on with it. The shooter that most definitely needs a sequel, and for whatever reason we're being messed about like hell with it, is Timesplitters 4. For those of you that don't know what the Timesplitters series is, firstly, what the hell is wrong with you? And secondly, it's a first-person shooter. You basically travel through time to do missions, hence the name. The games always have a huge weapon set, it has great comedic value, it is some of the funniest games going, superb multiplayer, a whole myriad of characters, and they really are just phenomenal games. And Crytek, who own the rights to the game, they're kind of messing everyone about. They're saying that they need to know that there's going to be enough interest in Timesplitters 4 before they make it. Well, pretty much everyone's clamouring for a fourth game, so I don't see what the problem is personally. But that is a game that definitely needs a sequel. No two ways about it. Another shooter that I think deserves a sequel is Perfect Dark. Again, a first-person shooter series. The original was similar to GoldenEye in many ways. Made by Rare, had a similar gameplay style, it was more sci-fi. It was actually a lot more refined than GoldenEye, in many ways better. And Perfect Dark Zero, it didn't live up to the hype, I'll admit that. But I still think it was a very good game in its own right. It had really fun multiplayer, 32 players on the Xbox 360, with no lag whatsoever, some fun game modes. I think given more development time, Perfect Dark Zero could have been really superb, which is why I'd love to see another Perfect Dark, hopefully on the next generation console. Although with Rare in their current state, it's impossible to predict what they'd do next. Under Microsoft's ruling, they're a bit hit and miss, shall we say. Mainly miss. Okay, one more shooter that I think definitely deserves a sequel of some kind is XIII, or XIII, because it was in Roman numerals. This is another first-person shooter, but it was rocking cel-shaded graphics, which looked really stunning for the time. It came out in the GameCube, Xbox, PS2 era, and it had a lot of comic book elements, so it kind of zoomed in with panels if you got headshot kills and stuff like that. It really glorified killing enemies in a certain way, but it was a really fun shooter outside of that. It was fast-paced, it had a really good story. As I mentioned, the art style was great, the multiplayer was adequate for the time, but the single player is the main focus with this game. And I think if they kept that cel-shaded style, kept the comic book style, and brought it into the current generation or even the next one, then it could be a phenomenal game. It's one of the IPs that I'm most disappointed that hasn't been resurrected, because I had a hell of a lot of fun on the original game. Okay, now the next one I guess you could class as something other than a shooter, but I've put it in anyway, is Mirror's Edge. Essentially a first-person parkour mixed with some shooting, which is why I threw it in here. But anyway, this is a game that really deserves a lot of praise for the way it tried to break the mould and try something new, and it succeeded in many ways, and it has quite a big cult following. I really liked its art style, the emphasis on time trials, on trying out new moves, the combat was largely solid, and it's one of those games where I think if they have a sequel to work out all the kinks, then it could be really a AAA franchise, because it was very close to begin with the first game, but I'd definitely love to see a Mirror's Edge 2. Okay, another shooter I would like to see a sequel for is Bulletstorm. Now, Bulletstorm is in many ways your very basic first-person shooter. It doesn't try and stand out in many ways. It just lets you kick a bunch of ass, have fun while you're doing it. It doesn't take itself too seriously, and it lets you be very creative in the way that you kill your enemies, and it rewards you for that creativity. You almost play the whole game like a meta game where it builds up points depending on how you kill enemies in what way. And I, for one, had a bloody good time playing it from start to finish. It was fast-paced, it never felt like it was dragging along, the graphics were really stunning actually, and it had large open environments, and I just think with a few extra modes, some proper online co-op, that it could really be a highly rated franchise. People Can Fly did a great job with the original, don't get me wrong. I think in many ways Bulletstorm got a bad press for being derivative, when I don't think it is. I think it's refreshing to see a game like that doesn't take itself so seriously and tries to emphasise the fun factor. Alright, another shooting game that I would like to see a sequel for is Star Wars Battlefront. Now this is basically every nerd's wet dream. Huge scale battles, playing with all your favourite Star Wars characters, vehicles included, what's not to like. Star Wars Battlefront had a massive following, they were quite highly rated as I recall, and it kind of baffles me that a third one was never made. I know it was in development and then either it got cancelled or it kind of fizzled out and a lot of artwork got leaked out, and I don't know what the status is with who owns the rights or whatever, but at some point a third game's got to happen. If they could move the title onto next generation consoles, up the player count to like 64 players, and that could be one of the best multiplayer experiences ever. Because although I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan, I still think it's a really cool universe to set a game in. So, much like Timesplitters 4, this is a no-brainer, it needs a sequel, and for whatever reason just hasn't got one. Okay, another shooter that I feel could do with a sequel is Brute Force. Now this one may be a bit divisive. Brute Force is a third-person shooter on the original Xbox, and before it came out it was kind of being lauded as a third-person Halo, and it didn't live up to that billing. But what it did do was provide a very solid third-person shooter with 4-player co-op, which at the time was almost unprecedented, for consoles at least. It gave 4 different characters that felt very different to actually play as. The gunplay was enjoyable. I felt the level design let it down, but it's still a game that I had a blast playing, and I think definitely it's one of those games that can look back on its original title, look back at the mistakes that they made, and they're very easy fixes. And maybe it's nostalgia that makes me want a Brute Force sequel, just because it pioneered a lot of things back when it came out, but it's definitely a franchise that I'd love to see another game from. And finally, for my shooters that need or deserve sequels, I would personally love to see a sequel for The Getaway, or The Getaway 2, so a third game in the series. For those of you that may not be accustomed to The Getaway, originally it was kind of lauded as the PlayStation 2's exclusive Grand Theft Auto, but it's a lot more linear and more focused on the action and the shooting side of things. And although it was really quite rough around the edges and the controls were a mess, the game was still really quite good to play. It had a great story, it was all about Cockney gangsters in London, which is a big thumbs up from me, I love that kind of thing. And I know a third game was kind of hinted at the start of the PlayStation 3, I think they released a tech demo or something along those lines, and then it never came to fruition. But I think it's a solid franchise that still carries quite some weight, so I'd love to see Sony pick this up again at some point, maybe as a launch title for the PlayStation 4. But The Getaway, either way, is a game that I'd love to see resurrected at some point. And that finishes off my list of games which I feel deserve sequels in the shooter category. As always, tell me what you think of my suggestions, give me your own. Try to keep it within the genre, so third or first person shooters. If you could like the video, I'd be very grateful. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.